From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Our featured guest on today's broadcast from the Kansas Farm Management Association, K-State's Kevin Herbel, will give his assessment of the economic state of production agriculture in Kansas currently, and Kevin will offer a checklist of what you producers can do to improve your financial management here in 2019. He'll concentrate on several areas, including managing debt structure, projecting the financial returns to each enterprise, and preparing a cash flow for the farm or ranch. Kevin will cover all of that and more next. And further ahead, K-State's Charlie Lee, this week talking about the nature of the Least Shrew and its underappreciated role in the prairie ecosystem. All this and more right here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, our Tuesday edition. And we'll spend the bulk of our first half hour today talking about farm management considerations as we roll into 2019, the obstacles that may be before you producers, and actually a checklist of what you can do to improve your financial management. As we've invited by Kevin Herbel. Kevin is the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association based at Kansas State University. Kevin, you have put together some thoughts that you'd like all producers to think about as they start to earnestly plan for the production year 2019. But just asking you, how do you read the economic conditions of Kansas production agriculture right now, since you have a hand on the pulse of that in your position?
Well, certainly, Eric, it is a time of much concern for many involved in agriculture right now. We've got anything all the way from trade issues influencing where things are at to, if someone's got livestock right now and some of the moisture and trying to feed cattle in the midst of that creates a lot of difficulties and issues to work through. But by and large, we've got some farms that during the last year have had a very good year financially, much of that driven by good yields in some instances. And then there's other operations that don't find themselves in such a strong position, whether that's due to having overextended themselves on the debt front during some of those better years or during recent years, whether that's due to not having had conditions for favorable production, either due to drought or certainly in some areas due to some hail events and different things of that sort. So a lot of variability, but certainly much need for a very close look at where a farm operation is at financially as decisions are made in this time.
And we'll walk through some points to consider along that line today, but it does start with, on the individual's part, knowing where that individual is at financially in a very realistic sense, mind you, right?
That is correct. So to listen to somebody say that things are difficult for agriculture right now because of whatever the aspect of it might be does not help someone know where they're at. For them to truly know the financial position of their farm, the financial direction things have been going in recent times, to be in a position where the individual managing a farm knows their financial position, knows their cost structure better than anyone else. And some people are in a position to have what they need before them to do so. Others need to put some effort into getting people around them to help them be able to do this. But individuals managing farms right now should work very hard to be proactive, not to be reactive or indifferent about the financial position and financial place they're at with their farm.
And to be so proactive, that is, you have to know your numbers, is what you say, and that gets back to records and the value of those numbers.
That's right. Keeping of financial records, whenever we talk about the Farm Management Association program, we'll certainly discuss the idea that keeping of financial records, that's the foundation of anything else we're able to do. Before we can do any planning do any analysis of a farm, you have to have strong financial records. I would encourage those managing farms as they look forward to 2019, as they use this time of the winter months, which is when a lot of planning does take place, spend this time to identify one or two steps they can take to either improve how they keep records for their operation or how they use those records in making management decisions.
By example, what could one do to, in fact, enhance their records? Things that you've come across as you've worked with producers.
Well, within that, we're going to have individuals on the farm, some of who have a method of putting receipts on the dash of the pickup or in a box under the bed. And when it comes to the end of the year, they try to pull those together or take those to their accountant, and there's their record keeping for the year. From that level, I think the idea of getting things in a stronger records system to make decisions in an improved way. The other might be beginning to take steps to identify your records on the standpoint of an enterprise level and understand more what the cost structure really is on the farm.
In past conversations, Kevin, you have always endorsed the idea of goal setting as part of farm management. And that is, in fact, on your checklist here as well, to know one's goals, put those expectations down in hard and fast terms.
For each of us as we make decisions, whether that's our day-to-day life, just living with our families, doing whatever our job might be, but certainly if we're managing a business, know the goals, the expectations, what it is that we're desiring to accomplish. If we don't have those down, it's really hard to know if we're headed in the direction of the things we want to achieve, and particularly when you get situations where multiple individuals are involved. And most of the farm operations around Kansas are in that position, where at least there's a husband and wife involved in decision-making and management of what's there. Oftentimes maybe another family member or a business partner of some kind, and having those goals and objectives written down for everyone to understand what those are, understand how the activities currently taking place relate to those goals and objectives, those expectations. And it gives something to be referred to and look back on as decisions are made to assess, are we really accomplishing what we're desiring to accomplish here? Or are we just going through the motions day to day, completing the work? There's always work to do. Right. We're completing the work that needs to be done today, and we'll do it again tomorrow. And we work hard to be getting things done around here. But are you working hard at doing the things that are really moving you in the direction that's achieving what you are really desiring to accomplish with your involvement being on that farm or ranch?
Down to the nitty-gritty here. And one of those things that you want producers to step back and look at very hard, their debt structure, and if there are any red flags within that structure.
At this point in time, we've got a lot of farms that during the good years of what are now moving back to 5 years and more ago, a lot of decisions were made to make purchases under a fairly short debt structure. We're going to pay these things off quickly. We're in a position to be able to do so. A lot of decisions were made to purchase machinery and equipment, get things in order on that farm to be more efficient with some of the activities, but in the midst of that, not understanding or fully thinking through the impact that had on the cost structure of the farm and the debt structure that it was placing them in. Just the environment we've had with the lower commodity prices, costs not having come down as much, have created a squeezing of that margin, which for pretty much every farm, outside of those that have had well above average yields and such, it's created a situation of tightening working capital. Working capital, just to describe it, that's the difference between the current assets or those things that can be quickly turned to cash in the next 12 months, less the amount of liabilities that are owed, whether that's the current debt, the operating line of credit type debt, or just the payments owed on term debts of that farm. That difference between those is the working capital, and that amount has decreased. It's become negative in some situations. When a farm manager has strong working capital, the opportunity to be in control of decision-making is there for that manager. They're able to make decisions when they want to make them, whether that's timing of sales, timing of purchases, whatever those things might happen to be. When working capital becomes weak, it creates a situation where other outside factors, other individuals in some cases, take on some or most of that control. It creates a difficulty for a manager to manage as they want when they get in that point in time. And so looking at ways, maybe it involves selling of some assets. Make sure the assets that you have in place on your farm are what you most need to accomplish the goals and objectives that you're about on your farm. If you're in a tight financial position, is there a way to sell one piece of equipment and purchase something else that's a little older, a little lesser cost to complete that same activity and still allow you to continue to operate? Now, we're in a point in time where the machinery and equipment may be worth less than what it was when it was purchased, and so that doesn't look like a good management decision. But don't ignore those as things to take a look at. Adjustment of timing of purchases of inputs, of sales. Certainly the thoughts towards some debt restructure opportunities can be considered. I don't know that that's something that ought to be put on the front burner of things considered right away if there's other management decisions that can be made. And leave the debt restructure option as something to be available when it's really needed to do. Now, there's some farms right now that have restructured debt multiple times in the last several years. I think the goal is to get things in place so that the one managing that farm can improve the management of their operation and look very critically at the changes that you might be able to make to accomplish that, and don't seek to be bound up in just your own thinking relative to that, but get others around you to advise and give direction, whether that be your lender in some cases, whether that be your farm management economist, if you're working with us in the KFMA program, another advisor, your accountant, someone or a group of someones to have around you and have involved with you in identifying and looking very critically at changes to be made if that's the position you find yourself in.
You've still more considerations on improving our financial management on farm or ranch. Kevin, if you'd hold on, we'd like to get into more of that with you after this break.
Very good.
Kevin Herbel is the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association. He'll return with us shortly here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Agriculture Today resumes now on the K-State Radio Network, and our guest across the way is the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association here at Kansas State University, Kevin Herbel. And Kevin is allowing some thoughts for you producers to consider on your own as far as amping up your financial management in 2019, what with some questions about the returns to farming and ranching. Kevin, something that you have trumpeted quite some time for producers as you work with them through the association, the value of looking at each enterprise in the operation and conducting a full analysis of that enterprise. And you think that certainly has merit in 2019 as well.
That would be the case. And I think as we make decisions on the farm, we're making some of those decisions on a broad level relative to the entire operation. There's a lot of decisions that are made relative to those individual enterprises. And as we talk about enterprise analysis, certainly keep in mind that each of these enterprises isn't something that exists in a silo all by itself. It's a part of a crop rotation. Activities, decisions made of a production of a given crop at a point in time is influenced by what's been done prior to that crop. It will influence what's going to be done on that same acre by the crops that will follow. decisions relative to managing livestock on a farm, use of cover crops, all of those factors are entering in. So when we talk about enterprise analysis and we seek to identify the costs, the inputs relative to a given enterprise, that's being done in the context of understanding that it's influenced by many things. But at the same time, we've got these decisions that we're making relative to our seed inputs, relative to the fertility, relative to pest management, and all these things to produce what we produce. And being able to identify those as best we can, knowing all the time when we begin to do things at this finer level, it's not perfect. There's going to be some weaknesses in the system. But being able to identify these things so that we can take a look at, how do my costs compare with others' costs? Where are some inefficiencies, or where am I more efficient than others? Identifying, what is a rough projected cost of production for what I'm intending to produce this next year. We can use an enterprise analysis of prior year's production of a given product to help us project and look forward to the place in which that cost of production might be as we look forward to next year, looking at that on a per acre basis and then with an average yield or an expected yield to break that down and even utilize that then as a beginning point for marketing planning. There's much advantage to being able to extend your marketing season as broadly as you can, not just by extending it longer. I know a lot of us have found ourselves in a position due to some of the trade issues and things going on at extending the marketing season on some products from last year longer after the fact than what might have been intended, looking to see what may be the results of some of the trade negotiations and stuff taking place. But I think many producers would find themselves in most years in an improved situation looking at extending their season earlier and getting a handle on that expected cost of production ahead of time, putting yourself in a position to respond to rallies as they occur earlier in a marketing season, and just kind of strengthen the position you're in and your understanding as to where you're at each of those points in time.
This really amounts to more of a surgical analysis of what you have going on in your operation. So you want to look at it with that kind of precision. And also coming back to your next point on the checklist, the value of benchmarking. You did hint at that a minute ago, making comparisons not only year to year on your operation, but where available, comparisons to peer operations around the state.
That's right. And benchmarks are very important. We can say, well, what is a benchmark? And there can be a lot of debate around what should be used to benchmark against. In the end, a benchmark is a reference point. We're talking about completing comparative analysis relative to a reference point. Well, that benchmarking can mean different things with different types of analysis. And certainly, as you mentioned there, the idea of looking at comparing trends on a farm, looking at that farm with itself over time. Where are improvements being made? Where may things be weakening? It can be a comparison against just a group of averages that are posted somewhere. Now, many would say, why do I want to compare to the average? I don't necessarily want to be average.
It's to be above average.
Those that are above average are the ones doing better. So that comparison can be with those that are the most profitable. It might be a comparison looking back at our expectations of what we're wanting to do on the farm. And it might be benchmarking against how are we doing at moving toward where we're wanting to be. Is it helping us move in the direction of where we want to be? And then from the standpoint of financial ratios, we'll often help farms compare their numbers against standards relative to where a given ratio, a given cost position is on their farm.
The resources of the Kansas Farm Management Association, by the way, as a footnote, are tremendous for this very purpose of benchmarking your operations. Now, preparing a cash flow plan for this coming year is as essential as anything else. And what's going to constitute that, Kevin?
Well, looking at cash flow planning, we think about a lot of things from a planning perspective. None of us involved in managing anything don't do some level of planning. But looking at the ability to put down on paper, put down in a computer, the figures of where we expect to be and the timing of when we expect things to happen in this next year can be a very useful planning tool. a very useful planning process. It is something that can be very influential in helping a producer do, as I stated earlier, moving from just being reactive or even indifferent to the things that are happening during the year to a position of being very proactive. It allows thinking through what needs to be considered during the coming year, looking at inputs, looking at planning where, plans have been made in most cases relative to what's going to be planted on given acres and some of those kind of things. As market conditions change, as opportunities for inputs change, there may be adjustments needed for that. But the ability to look forward and consider each of those things, to consider machinery and equipment needs. Maybe those things are along the lines of updating equipment and purchases that might happen, or it might be in a tighter financial situation, repairs that will be planned to be made, and the ability to assess when those might occur, what's going to be done to make sure the financial resources are available to take care of those things. The ability to prioritize and think through them can be very useful. Now, one of the things that's a given when we look forward, say, for the next 12 months and say, here's my cash flow plan, here's what I expect to happen, the one thing we can be certain about is it won't happen just like we just projected it to be. Right. So a very, very necessary steps to take are to monitor that plan going through the year, identify where it's different. Now, that might, with certain farms, occur more on a monthly basis. Depending on the production, if it's primarily a crop farm, that might not be something that's occurring monthly, but rather more on a quarterly or even a kind of a seasonal basis as things occur and we look at where we're at. So the situation will certainly cause that to change and look a little different, but always looking to answer the questions during that monitoring of the plan. Are there concerns? Have new opportunities developed? What adjustments are needed? It's much easier to be proactive rather than reactive as that business is managed.
That plan needs to flex as need be during and throughout the year as situations arise. And just a quick note also on your checklist about machinery and equipment management. When it comes to cost management and keeping things moving smoothly on the farm, you would like producers to pay special attention to that area.
Machinery cost is one that does fairly regularly create a difference between more profitable and less profitable farms. As I sit down and have opportunity to work one-on-one with some farms, machinery cost is one of the areas that we'll look at fairly quickly in that analysis because the number of times that there's something to address or consider there is quite often. So reasons to be looking at that. I think from a machinery management standpoint, there's a need to be very efficient in machinery management. Timeliness of production operations is incredibly important. And, we see that this last year when we had drought conditions and then we had high moisture conditions. And once those rains came, the windows of time to complete planting, harvest, whatever it might be, activities were not. Those windows were not very big. They were quite small and things needed to happen quickly. So timeliness of production operations is very critical to being profitable on the farm. At the same time, while that's critical, cost management, debt management on the farm are essential for the operation to be able to continue moving forward. And those things, those parts cannot be ignored.
All right. Well, toward the tail end of this checklist, Kevin, you've one more guideline of importance for producers toward the objective of improving financial management on the farm or ranch here in 2019. We need to take another break, and we'll come back and address that and ask you for some summary comments on this topic. Along with us today, Kevin Herbel, the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association out of Kansas State University. From the K-State campus, you're listening to Agriculture Today. Stay with us.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network as we conclude our conversation here with the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association at K-State, Kevin Herbel, as we're into ideas on improving farm and ranch financial management in 2019, walking through Kevin's checklist toward that end. And Kevin, we're down to that final item you have, and it's one that may well get lesser fanfare, but it's also just as important as anything. Having a concept of what your family living costs will be and accounting for those.
That's correct. A lot of the farms that we work with, even within the farm management program, don't keep a detailed level of family living records. In many cases, we work very hard to manage our business well. We look at the money that we're going to draw out of, and then maybe it's more difficult to talk about. Business decisions are one thing. The family finances can be a little more difficult sometimes to talk about. But keeping those records, understanding, identifying where the dollars are going is the beginning part there. Going back to our initial point earlier about knowing where you're at financially. Mm-hmm. Well, this is knowing where you're at financially from a family living cost perspective, and that's going to require keeping records and keeping those records based on different types of accounts of those family living expenses to identify where some of the points are, where maybe some adjustments and changes can be made. Now, everyone's facing a situation where healthcare costs, things relative to health insurance, is one that many would say has almost become out of control. Robin Reed kind of worked through taking a look at health insurance costs on a subset of the KFMA farms and identified that for that subset, the health insurance expense had doubled over a 10-year period of time. Everyone would look at their own figures and understand that to be so. But I think it's important to step back and say, let's get our numbers together and know and understand where we're really at for our costs, whether that be actual family living costs, if it's a partnership or other sort of entity, the draws that we're taking out, the money that we're taking from the farm. Initially, is our farm generating a sufficient amount of dollars to allow taking those dollars out? If it's not, what types of adjustments do we need to make? Do we need to reduce our living expenses to meet what we're able to draw out of the farm or would expect to be able to? Do we need to look at opportunities of other revenue production, whether that be other enterprises on the farm, whether that be another business venture of some kind to get started with, or whether that be employment in some other place to allow generating of some wages and other income to come in. But don't ignore the importance of that as we look at assessing farm financial management.
Well, Kevin, your hope here is that producers will, in fact, set the time aside before field work starts to pick up here in the weeks ahead, while they have the opportunity to truly sit down and evaluate where they stand in all of these categories and then plan accordingly to adjust where necessary.
That is correct. And we can't give them, here's the 10 steps that everyone needs to take to get themselves in a strong financial position. But we can encourage them to know and understand their own situation and be proactive. Look to move forward in a positive way. It may be that your situation looks very positive, and so it's easy to look in a positive way. It may very well be for many that it's not a positive situation they're looking at. But taking proactive steps and beginning to look at how they can move forward in a direction that does help them better achieve their goals and objectives, better reach the expectations they have for what they want it to be like and living as an individual, a family that's living on the farm or ranch.
It's been valuable input, and thanks for walking through all of this with us. We will touch base again soon.
Thank you, Eric.
And once more, calling it a checklist of things that you producers can do to improve your financial management here in 2019, as shared with us by Kevin Herbel. He's the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association out of Kansas State University. And by the way, if you'd like to learn more about the KFMA and the services it provides to participants, you can go to the agmanager.info website, kstateagmanager.info. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and on we go now to this week's edition of Milk Lines. Here's K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the condition of the teat skin and teat ends of their dairy herds. With the recent cold weather, we've likely had a decline in the integrity of the teat skin and also teat ends on our dairy farms across the state. As we think about how this happens, it's really a degenerative cycle that really starts when the skin cells begin to dehydrate. They dehydrate for several different reasons. One is cold temperatures. Cold air generally contains less relative humidity, so it dries the skin quicker. Also, exposure to wind and freezing temperatures will actually increase this process as well. As a result of the loss of moisture from the skin surface, those cells begin to break down. And as they break down, it affects the skin renewal process. This results in a thickening of the skin. We call it hypokeratosis. And what you see on your dairy herd is flakes of skin, and also you see accumulations of this skin essentially at the teat ends. So the issue for you as a dairy farmer is these cracks harbor bacteria, and this bacteria may actually increase somatic cell counts in our herds and infections within the udder. So how do we handle this, and what can we do to improve the situation for our dairy animals? Well, number one, think about the animals as they're exiting the milking parlor when the temperatures are below freezing. If the animals are exiting with the post-dip that you're using still wet on the skin, this will increase the chances that there may be freezing and irritation and dehydration of the skin. One of the things you could do would be allow that dip to dry for a minute or two before you release the animals, or you could even blot it off. In some cases, we might even recommend using a dry dip for a few days so that we avoid that wetness. Second thing you need to consider is the types of ingredients that are included into your dips. First are emollients. Those are things like glycerin and glycerol and propylene glycol, sorbitol, and aloe are a few. Those are basically ingredients that we use to increase the amount of moisture that's attracted to the skin. Yes, these compounds do attract moisture from the air toward the teat skin, thus helping the skin reduce the rate at which it dries out. The second group that we often use are what we call moisture barriers. These are items which actually reduce the loss of moisture from the teat skin. In severe cases, a lot of times we do this to provide a moisture barrier to prevent additional loss of moisture from the skin and helping the skin heal itself. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly visit featuring Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Here's a critter, Charlie, we haven't talked of before, and it's found in Kansas. It's called the shrew. It's a prairie dweller and can be at times a house dweller as well, you say.
The least shrew is not well known in Kansas. It's actually the smallest mammal in Kansas, and close to being one of the smallest mammals in the world. It's only about 3 inches in total length. It's got a long pointed snout, which extends considerably past the mouth and has nostrils on the end, very tiny black eyes. And one thing that's kind of interesting about the least shrew, it has a very large ear opening that's hidden under the hair. If you part the hair back, you see the ear is disproportionate in size, much larger than what you would expect for a small mammal, and that helps them find their prey. There are many people that probably have never seen a shrew, or if they saw the shrew, they thought it was a mouse, or I get people telling me that they think they're moles, but they're much smaller than moles, much smaller than many house mice. It's distinguished from other shrews, and we do have several other species of shrews found in Kansas by being smaller size. It's a little more brown in color. It's got a longer snout, has 2 fewer teeth, and the arrangement of those teeth in their upper jaw is somewhat different than the others. The Least Shrew is found throughout most of the eastern part of the United States, but is found in low numbers all the way across Kansas.
And it is a burrowing mammal?
Well, they do build tunnels. Sometimes those tunnels are very shallow and maybe just more on the soil surface where they just kind of separate the sod from the underlying soil. But they've been found to dig tunnels as deep as 8 inches. In one research trial where they were measuring tunneling activity from shrews, 2 shrews built a tunnel that was 2 feet long with 4 openings in a 2-hour period. But generally, those tunnels are going to be right at the soil surface or just very shallow. Those tunnel systems would often have a nest chamber. That nest chamber then would also be protected by the shelter of a rock or log stump as part of that tunnel system.
And that tunnel system is used to chase down their prey. What kind of diet do shrews have?
Well, least shrews eat mainly small insects, snails, earthworms, centipedes, spiders, and the dead bodies of small mammals. They take in very little vegetative material, and because of their poor eyesight, they locate their food mostly by the sense of touch. When they catch prey, they've been known to hamstring the knee tendons of frogs and attack the joints of crickets and grasshoppers so that they can't escape, and then they're able to feed on those critters. They seem to be afraid of mice, and part of it is they're much smaller than house mice, and they don't possess venom like the short-tailed shrews do.
Their reproductive traits, are they prolific in that sense then?
No, not really. They can have young all through the year, but most of the time the reproduction is occurring from February through the end of summer. Several litters are produced. Usually a litter would have about 5. They are weaned at about a month old. By that time, the young are almost fully grown in size. Both parents appear to participate in feeding of the young because they're found in the same nest chambers.
So they tunnel outdoors, they turn up occasionally indoors as well, but in either case, you say, control of the least shrew is not usually warranted.
No, certainly they're outside. No control or management is necessary. Occasionally they will find their way into homes, and I tell folks when that occurs that they just need to do a better job of tightening up their home. They're not capable of chewing their way in. They've got to find a crack or a crevice and get through. It's really a homeowner's responsibility to seal those types of cracks and crevices up, or occasionally they're going to have a shrew inside that may be doing a good job of catching some insects that might be in there, including crickets.
As a sidebar, Charlie, you say that a study is out there that looked at the shrew and its consumption of toxicants, which were not targeted toward that animal.
Yeah, as I was collecting some research on anticoagulant rodenticides, I found an article that illustrated how many other small mammals have been exposed to the anticoagulant rodenticides, and one of those was shrews. This particular study was looking at bromadiolone, the prevalence and the concentrations that were found in rodents and shrews near bait boxes that were placed outside. They had a trapping grid around the bait boxes and found that bromadiolone was detected in more than 12% of all of the small rodents and insectivores, including shrews. And the prevalence of small mammals that showed exposure to the anticoagulant rodenticide decreased the further away they got from the bait box, but up closer to the bait box within 20 yards or so, almost 50% of the small animals, including shrews that were captured, had detectable levels of bromadiolone. There was also some detection in bromadiolone all the way out to almost 100 yards away from the rodenticide boxes in other species. So we can see that rodenticide exposure, when you're trying to use a toxicant outside and using a bait box, that's certainly an advisable practice. But still, there are other mammals out there that may be feeding on things that have died from the rodenticide, including least shrews.
So duly noted there, but in the end, the least shrew plays a role in the ecosystem of value, and therefore we should appreciate that.
Shrews are certainly valuable mammals. They're very small, but they contribute to our ecosystem. They dig and work the soil. They do a great job at decomposition of other animals and serve as food for other predators.
And there's background on the least shrew, readily found in Kansas. We appreciate the work, Charlie. He's a wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. And that's our time for today. Thanks for tuning in. Please be back with us right here tomorrow, won't you? Meantime, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.